In part 1 of this series, I illustrated Marx's foundational beliefs about life before capitalism. In part 2, I drew out how capitalism actually works according to Marx, insisting that the system itself must be overthrown by a workers' revolution. In this part, I will illustrate what Marx believed reality after capitalism would look like. The biggest difficulty about this subject is that Marx spent so much time criticizing capitalism that he said very little about what the aftermath of capitalism would be like. Fortunately for us, we not only have the outlines that we have made in this series, but we also have history itself as a guide. While Marx was unsuccessful in creating a workers' revolution in his lifetime, many people inspired by his work have tried to do just that, so there's a lot of material to work with. With that in mind, let's try to illustrate the world that Marx advocated for and what modern-day leftists believe they are creating through their actions.
I'm Artistic Layman, and this is Demystifying Marx, Part 3. After capitalism. A concept that is repeated in Marx's circles is seizing the means of production. But what does that mean exactly? In Marx's time, the factory was the means of production, the place where commodity creation took place. And so, by seizing the means of production, Marx means that the workers should take control of the factories for themselves, away from the capitalists. Now, obviously this would be considered straight-up theft, but remember the details we went over in Part 2. The capitalists are exploiting the labor of the workers, forcing them to work more than is needed to make more value than is required for self-reproduction. And since the capitalist is not performing any labor in the creation of commodities, it makes no sense to say that the capitalist really owns the means of production. Commodities exist because of labor, and since the workers do all the labor, it is the workers who actually control, and therefore rightfully own the means of production. So from Marx's perspective, the workers are not stealing the factory from the capitalist. The workers are taking back the value of the labor that is rightfully theirs. This is the purpose of the workers' revolution. So with the capitalist, let's just say removed from the picture, what would the post-capitalist society look like? Without the need to make surplus value for the capitalist or capital, all of the surplus value would just go into commodities, and most importantly, back into the workers. The workers are now able to reproduce themselves and also the factory at a constant rate rather than the ever-expanding rate under capitalism, which means the need for exploitation ceases to exist. This is what a post-capitalist society, or more simply a communist society, should be like. A society that has all the advances and commodities of capitalism, but with none of the exploitation. It is often illustrated that society will move in stages, from capitalism to socialism and then to communism, and socialism is the stage where the removal of exploitation occurs. This is what every socialist movement from the USSR of Russia to the CCP of China has been and still is trying to accomplish. At this point, you might have noticed something about the illustrations of the pre-capitalist and post-capitalist worlds. They are basically the same in structure. This gives us important insights about Marxism that often get overlooked. First of all, capitalism is a necessary component toward the creation of a communist society. The second insight is that rather than illustrating history as a series of linear stages, it makes more sense to see it as a circular motion that elevates itself at the end. It's kind of like the hero's journey, where an ordinary person leaves his home to have an adventure and then comes back to his home, now a hero. Marx's theory of capitalism is seeing all of history as society's heroic adventure. Starting from the threshold of pre-capitalism, going down to the abyss of capitalism, having a transformation through socialism, and going back up home to communism. With that in mind, is it really a surprise that Marx has such an appeal even to this day? When you put aside all the boring ramblings and economic jargon, Marx is effectively calling you to join society's adventure to the great heroic end. You get that sense of enthusiasm when you hear leftists excitedly proclaiming their politics, even if they haven't fully articulated it to that degree. And that's pretty much it. Karl Marx's theory of capitalism. Man labors on nature to create value for the constant self-reproduction of himself and his fellow man. Capitalists come along and get man to labor in a factory to create not just value, but surplus value that is used for the reproduction of the capitalist and capital, reproducing the capitalistic system at an ever-expanding, exploitative rate.
The system gets so exploitative and unstable that eventually the workers revolutionize and take the factories away from the capitalists. Finally, man now works in the factory he controls to create value for a prosperous self-reproduction for himself and his fellow man in communism.
Wow, Lehman, you just summarized your entire series in less than a minute.
You think that's impressive? Das Kapital Volume 1 would take at least 43 hours to read.
Well, aren't you just so super smart?
Anyway, now we get to criticize Marx's theory.
Okay, what's there to criticize?
Everything. From its presuppositions, to its implementation, to its historical results, nothing about this theory has proven itself to be true.
And I bet you're gonna go in detail about that in part 4, right?
Yes, I am.
Looking forward to it. Good night.
Well, until next time, may the will of God be your way.